Recently, I have been fascinated with the hit multiplayer sensation Among Us. Admittedly, it is not the most mechanically complex or well-functioning game on the market, but weekend after weekend, I have been gathering my wonderful friends, and Silas, from all across the country to kill each other on a tiny little spaceship. Which got me thinking, why do I think Among Us works so much better than the card games that inspired it, like Mafia or Werewolf? Well, buckle up, as we take a short trip to Electrical, just you and me, to look at how Among Us sets up this distrust. First off, let me briefly explain the game that inspired it all, Mafia. Well, Mafia, Werewolf, or the numerous other versions of the games, revolves around the number of players each receiving a role. In the case of Mafia, most are citizens, with a select few being labeled as Mafia, whose job is to kill the normal citizens. Most of these games also have special roles like detectives or doctors, but I do not want to go further into that here, as it does not apply to Among Us. Each round, the Mafia is given an opportunity to kill a citizen of their choice without the citizens knowing. After that, every player discusses who they believe the Mafia is, and may vote to eliminate one of the players by a majority vote if they believe them to be the Mafia. The Mafia wins if they equal the number of citizens, and the citizens win if the Mafia is eliminated before that point. Pretty simple stuff. Though while I do have a problem with the card game Mafia, mainly that it's hard to glean any sort of evidence as a citizen outside of some logic in the debate portion, it is still a fun time nonetheless. Before I continue, I want to state that I am not claiming that Among Us ripped off these games, or that Among Us is the superior product. I simply use them for comparison's sake, as physical and digital games both have different strengths. Among Us is set up pretty similarly, with the majority of the players being the good crewmates, while a couple are tasked as the imposter. The imposters still win if they equal the number of crewmates, and the crewmates still win if they eliminate the imposters before that point. There are a few other ways to win, but I'll get into that a bit later. So how does Among Us fix this problem of information? Well, the first thing Among Us does is set up the rules slightly differently. There's no longer just one person who will die a night. Instead, any number of crewmates may die between discussion sessions. Imposters could theoretically win without a meeting ever being called, though meetings could still be called when a button is pressed or when a dead body is found, both of which give you a chance to vote out imposters. One of the biggest things that Among Us does differently than Mafia is that the crewmates have a more active role and a chance to learn information. In Mafia, you gain zero knowledge during the kill phase of the game, meaning as a citizen, it is nearly impossible to determine who the Mafia is other than a gut instinct you have that people are acting shady during the debate portion of the game. In Among Us, players are free to move around and investigate their fellow crewmates. They could try to catch the imposter in the act of doing something dirty, or keep tabs on the locations of the other players to use some deductive reasoning when that first body inevitably shows up somewhere. This also works both ways, as the imposter is given more time to create an alibi for themselves. Crewmates gathering facts that could help them in their investigation also means that crewmates are susceptible to bad information and false leads. Following someone around as the imposter could mean that you'll have someone to fight for your side when the communications are open for that discussion on who to eject next. Why it can't be Yellow, me and him go way back like Cadillac seats. But it also means that you're the first person suspected when your buddy kicks the bucket. Moving alone adds a lot in terms of player agency and interesting logical evidence that was seemingly lacking in the physical card game. The ship, or whatever map you're playing on, is set up nicely to allow for information to be learned if you're observant, but also doesn't allow for any one player to become all-knowing. Angles of lights, map layout, corridors, task locations, and vent locations all reward the observant player with potential clues and questions to ask during the discussion portion. However, the immense size of the ship inhibits any single player from gathering all this information by themselves. It is simply impossible to keep tabs on every player during every instant, so there's always going to be a plausible deniability from imposters regarding their locations and actions if they are smart about it. And this even is an opportunity to plant seeds of disinformation as well. Though the previous points would be irrelevant if every crewmate just refused to move and simply sat in the cafeteria all game. Luckily, this is not the case, as there are two mechanics set in place to prevent this. Like any good horror film, the characters will mindlessly scatter to be eliminated alone in different corners of the house. The first is the task system. Tasks are given at random to crewmates, and these tasks can be completed at specific points around the map to fill up the progress bar. Filling up this bar completely allows the crewmates to instantly win the game no matter the number of imposters remaining, so players are heavily incentivized to run into the far thralls of the ship, away from the safety of company to complete them. Because of this, games almost always center around the idea of doing tasks, as opposed to simply routing out who the killer is. Sure, knowing who the imposters are is important, but but in the early goings, crewmates usually prioritize doing tasks to force the imposters to worry a little more of a task victory. Tasks, rather cleverly, require the attention of whoever is performing them and blocks a large portion of the screen. This means that even if you are partnered with another player, it still gives them the opportunity to kill while using you as their alibi. Having your screen covered and your attention taken away during an intense game of Simon Says leads to a perfect scenario for a murder to happen right under your very nose. These tasks also become a primary source of information, as what tasks you are doing, where you are doing them, and who you are with become vital information in the discussion process. From my personal experience, questioning usually stems from these lines of attacks to try to catch the imposter in a lie. In some instances, these tasks can even be used to confirm an individual is not the imposter. The tasks, I believe, are the strongest thing that Among Us adds to the game to force players to move around the ship while also subtly providing information for the observant. The second mechanic that forces movement is the emergency mechanic. Imposters can periodically set up an emergency. Some simply aid in their rampage, like knocking out the lights until they are fixed or knocking out communications, while others, like the reactor melting down or oxygen, become a win condition by themselves. This is the imposter's secondary win condition, as if a life-threatening emergency occurs for too long, then the imposters win regardless of the number of crewmates. So, time to come back to that ultimate question. How does this all combine to create that wonderful blend of distrust and chaos? First, as mentioned, no one individual has access to all information regarding the other players, so knowing who to trust with new information is critical. Players cannot be taken at face value, as the imposter could easily be spreading lies throughout your ranks. Did Rubbly Gloves give you the truth? Or is he a filthy little bad boy that hides in the vents like Colonel Pork claims he is? Hearing two plausible but entirely incompatible recountings of events throws a wrench into knowing who to trust. Second, players are forced to do tasks away from each other. Your attention span will be split during tasks, as well as a large portion of your screen covered. Ideally, players do not spend every second with each other in pairs, as that vastly increases the amount of time it would take to complete tasks. But even if they choose to do so, not having an accurate account of a person at every given instant leaves the possibility in your mind that maybe they did murder my friend in those 10 seconds my screen was covered by my task. Even the emergencies usually force players to split up, as to solve them players usually will have to perform two separate tasks in different parts of this ship. The tasks and emergencies mean that players will never have true confidence in others. Third are those ever so spicy meetings. Information collides, and accusations soar, as each player compares notes and findings. Two crewmates might not find the other's story plausible despite both being perfectly true. Odd behaviors, tricks of the eyes, and behavior that can only be described as sus can cause crewmates to turn on each other. All of this is without even considering the damage imposters can do. While the tasks and gaps of information set the stage for distrust, the meetings are the performance, in which all of these feelings of distrust explode out into the open. Ultimately, in my mind, distrust is the cause of the main enjoyment of Among Us. Being an imposter, it is a joy to come up with convincing tales to fool your friends by causing as much confusion as possible. As a crewmate, it is enjoyable to play detective and uncover the slightest flaw in the imposter's alibi. Without this distrust, the game would simply be a guessing game of who could be the imposter, as not enough information could be learned. Or, if too much information is known, it leads to a simple case of pointing out the liar. Distrust and unease help push the information gathered into the middle ground, where a lot is learned but not a lot is verified. It makes every player a potential killer, and opens up any number of possible theories that can be deducted. Ultimately, it makes us distrustful of those that stand among us. As always, thank you for lasting this long. Let me know below if I missed any ways that Among Us creates distrust. I would have loved to talk about some of the meta rules of the game, like muting the dead and turning off communications during playtime, but I only have so much time. But until our next outing, Godspeed.